Next video, we have the Master of Maneuver Warfare, Turenne, campaign of 1674, by HistoryMarche. I have no idea about any of this.
It is late autumn 1674, and in the great halls of the Holy Roman Empire, the high commands of the Emperor Leopold I and Elector Frederick William of Brandenburg have made a fateful decision. Following the despoliation of the Palatinate by the forces of the French King Louis XIV, and with French gains in the war against the Dutch Republic increasing on the victory of the Great Conde at Senef the previous August, the Imperial Alliance has decided that France itself will be subject to invasion, and the war taken to the very soil of the Sun King.
Yeah, I don't really know anything about this period of history.
To this end, a huge army under Alexander de Bournonville, Count of Hénin-Littard, moves like a juggernaut and occupies the neutral city of Strasbourg, using it as a bridgehead to cross the Rhine and move into French territory. To oppose this force, Louis can only call on his stalwart, Henri de la Tour d'Auvergne, known to all simply as Turenne, and a relatively paltry 30,000 French soldiers. Turenne's difficult cause is made exponentially more acute by the news that a second Brandenburger army under the Grand Elector himself is en route to link up with Bournonville, a development that would render almost any set peace battle between the two sides a foregone conclusion. With the Emperor's company still pouring over the Rhine, Turenne moves out to save France from what is almost certain to be a ruinous onslaught.
Alright then.
The French state of Louis XIV is a wonder of the early modern age. Not only does it lead Europe in science, art, and philosophy, the king heads the first regular army in a millennium that approaches those of the ancient Caesars in size and capability. While the medieval armies of the French kings had numbered barely over 10,000 men during peacetime and increased by 1 or 2-fold by the hiring of mercenaries or the drafting of high nobility and their retainers.
I always say it, but yeah, it is crazy to think during the time of the 100-Year War and all that. Yeah, I mean, army size were tiny compared to what we tend to think of an army. Yeah, they were tiny, like just a few thousands or something. And it's not like, it was only like in more modern day that they had massive army, Napoleonic Wars or World War I and II. Back in the day, there was massive army too. I mean, at the time of Alexander, at the time of the Roman Empire, they had massive army. But yeah, at some point in medieval time, armies became like tiny.
Louis had built on the considerable advancements of his namesake father, and now with his conflict against the Dutch and the Empire raging all around his borders, his army numbers close to 300,000 men, an astronomical force. Yet only a fraction of these are available to Turenne in the declining months of 1674. The main French field army is to the north with Conde, mopping up in the aftermath of Senef, and the rest are occupied with operations against the still dangerous Spanish in the shadow of the Pyrenees to the south. Turenne looks at his situation while Bournonville musters to reduce the Rhineland, and he realizes that to sit in a defensive posture is to invite his already fragile force to melt away due to desertion and disease over the debilitating winter. The Frenchman thus decides that Elan will be the order of the day, and he sets out to confront his enemies and prevent their union.
Just take him from behind.
With Bournonville's main force at Ensheim, Turenne arrives at Molsheim
Back to the
on the
river.
3rd of October, having marched his men through the night. This position has the effect of disrupting Bournonville's contact with his main headquarters at Strasbourg, but Turenne is not finished yet. The next day, the 4th of October, he marches out from Molsheim to confront the Imperials. Bournonville is confident enough in his superiority to march and meet the French, but he
Where's the
deploys in
numbers?
a defensive posture, reasonably gauging that the cold and precipitous conditions will favor the stationary host. When Turenne surveys the imperial host, he notes that its center is formed around the village of Onsheim itself.
Yeah, that's a weird setup. Like, it looks easy to attack just one side.
With woods on both the right and left flanks. The woods to Bournonville's right are far enough away by the river Ile to be of little disturbance, but the woods on the imperial left will be vital if Turenne is to break the enemy center and take control of the village. As such, he orders his lines to focus on an attack there at the outset. Both armies deploy in the front and reserve lines, with cavalry on the wings. The influence of the great Swedish king, General Gustavus Adolphus, is still seen 4 decades on from his death in Turenne's deployment of infantry support units placed between his cavalry squadrons. Interestingly, the French army also contains a British contingent, 4 regiments in total, who are a holdover from the earlier official English involvement in the war. Though it is a secret, Charles II has promised Louis of France that he will eventually return England to the Catholic fold when the time is correct. In the meantime, Louis will give him much needed funding in return for his clandestine troops. For the initial attack on the wood, Turenne elects to utilize infantry and a dragoon unit to be sent forth to the trees. 8 battalions of foot plus the mounted detachment. They move quickly toward the thicket. The artillery duel between the 8 French artillery pieces in their front line against the imperial guns, churning up clots of earth amidst the companies and filling the air with a quaking roar.
That's the way to put it.
There is no movement from the woods. The French soldiers hurrying toward the tree line begin to dream that Bournonville has been overwhelmed by Turenne's sudden appearance after the forced march and somehow overlooked the strategic point. They come within the last 100 yards and are allowed one more moment of exquisite optimism before a sharp snap emits from the woods. And the hidden imperial force opens up and cuts down the front line of French marauders.
Shit.
Bournonville has indeed recognized the importance of the woods, and so they have been solidly reinforced with 8 guns, as well as half a dozen battalions of infantry, who are now firing on the floundering Frenchmen. The dragoons attempt to charge, but it comes to naught save death and injury. And even though the French officers quickly bring their men to order and fire in volleys, the hidden enemy within the woods has an open target on Turenne's men in the open. The French infantry and the dragoons.
I actually wonder, like, in this part of history with the line musket fire, right? How often the strategy of, placing your line somewhat in woods for covers was used, and forcing, the other side to, like, march in the open toward you. In the Napoleonic Wars, I don't think it happened much, but it seems like a good strategy, even though I guess the trees will break the formation a little, but I don't know. The protection seems worth it.
Try again, but the woods are too well defended. Withdrawal is the only option, save suicidal frontal attack. It is a dispiriting setback, but Turenne knows that he must have the woods if he is to have the battle, and so he draws companies from the reserve. 2 of the regiments from the reinforcements are of the British Brigade, and they number amongst their officers one John Churchill, the future Duke of Marlborough, and a man pivotal to British and European history.
He's not related to Winston, is he?
In spite of Churchill's presence amidst his compatriots, the second operation to seize the woods is no more successful than the first, and the two sides settle into a grim back and forth of musket and small artillery fire. The October cold has not abated with the onset of afternoon, and the rain has continued to fall, hampering the ability of both sides to bring their main guns to bear in the contest. Turenne ratchets up the pressure on the units in the woods by sending a cavalry detachment around to attempt an envelopment from the far side of the tree line. But to the commander Vorbrum's dismay, they discover that Bournonville has placed no fewer than 8 battalions behind the main force in reserve.
Yes, so many troops.
And these easily deal with the onrushing cavalrymen, stinging musket volleys cutting riders down from every direction.
If this side isn't working, try the other side.
Watching the proceedings with satisfaction, decides that the moment has come for action. And with his French opponent stretched thin on his lines, and with companies out of position, he orders an advance.
Actually, this looks pretty good. Again, just sweep them from the side. And now they're moving out of position, it's pretty good.
The attack is quick and strong enough that the Imperial mounted right quickly push back and scatter their opposite numbers on the French side. But though outnumbered, the French center and left wing reserve hold, and the soft ground soon turns to morass for the Imperial infantry and their rear units. They cannot bring their advantage to bear, and the French guns now have the advantage of range. They cut deep holes in the Imperial lines, and when the offensive has juddered to a certain halt, a counterattack begins. The French left having regrouped, and the Imperial lines are pushed back to their initial positions. Simultaneously, the focus on the main action has taken Imperial attention from the woods, and the combined French and British forces are at last able to cut through the defenses and take the position. The French advance across the entire field, but they are finding the same problems of terrain the Imperials suffered during their offensive.
Right.
The French guns cannot be brought forward, and the conditions are worsening as the light starts to fade. Vauban regulates his company and squadrons, and then with a flourish of trumpets that sounds flattened in falling mist, a major charge is mounted over the sodden ground toward Ansheim itself. Bournonville's units steel themselves, and the officers and commanders beat men into line as the riders encroach out of the gloom. Pistol and musket flash like lightning strikes out of the grey, and the sabres and bayonets are deployed in a struggle that results in terrible wounds. Grenadiers to the fore in both sides lock weapons, but the Imperial guns are now in the advantage, and the French are forced back when the Imperials hold their line.
Are these trenches?
The French guns reach a position of range, and they begin to bombard the enemy line while the dusk finally settles in for the night.
Stalemate.
Bournonville has seen enough, and he begins an organized withdrawal.
Really?
Turenne, eventually seeing any gains will have to go unpursued in the dark, and that more attacks will only lead to further losses, begins to do the same. Only a holding force of French cavalry is left on the field, and that too departs into the night.
Very nice.
The French call the Battle of Ansheim a great victory, but the fact is that Bournonville and the Great Elector can now unite and still stand ready to invade France again when the new campaign...
I mean, it bought time, you know. I don't know if I would call it a great victory, but it bought time at least. You know, just 30 minutes advance.
Campaign season begins in the spring. Thus, Turenne elects to do what no one expects, and many believe to be impossible.
Winter attack.
At his new headquarters in Dietwiller, he prepares for a winter offensive.
Oh boy.
From Louis comes royal assent, and from the army of Conde, the king sends 20 infantry battalions and 24 cavalry squadrons to aid in the effort.
Good.
The man who has virtually invented the role of Minister for War, Francois-Michel Letellier, the Marquis of Louvois, begins the organization of the massive amount of food, fodder and clothes for the men who will fight the winter battles. Turenne also receives around 6,000 men under the command of the Marquis of Crequi, but he dismisses them within 7 days, for they are ill-disciplined, old-style units raised by entitled nobles, and the French army is now a place for real fighting men, professional soldiers in all but...
It's interesting because, like, 100 years later, it will have gone back to the army being, you know, kind of like outdated and very much under the system of the nobles, and then the revolution happens, right? And then once again, the army is back to being, you know, moving forward, advancing technology, strategy, and all that. It's interesting. Only for them to, again, be very behind by the time of, well, the Franco-Prussian War and then World War I, right? It's interesting.
Name.
Constant
As the
evolution, rest on your laurel, evolution, rest on your laurel.
snow starts to fall and Turenne waits for Bournonville and the Elector to let down their guards. Louis puts the royal power behind an even greater effort to draw supplies from the nearby provinces to keep the army in the field. Finally, after a month of waiting in freezing conditions, Bournonville and Frederick William take their armies out of the field and into Colmar and Celestat to see out the season. It is the moment Turenne has been waiting for. He makes a show of going into winter quarters himself, placing token garrisons in towns like Saverne, Haguenau, Rambervillers, and
Haguenau, isn't that a pretty important place in World War II?
Remiremont. But instead of staying in camp, he sets out with his strongest men and animals 2 weeks before Christmas. It is a bold move. To elude spies and scouts, he leads his men through a snowstorm and heads for the Vosges Mountains. He breaks the army into smaller detachments to take different routes, and over the next fortnight they battle against the cold to reach Alsace. Finally, they emerge from the beach and spruce-lined trails to the shock of the townspeople of Belfort as they ready themselves for the holy season of Christ's birth.
I mean, they're probably thinking, shit, Christmas is ruined. People are gonna die. It's
The
not a good sign.
Imperial army, led by Bournonville, is spread out across Alsace, thinking they have the region secured. But Turenne catches them off guard.
Perfect.
On December 29th, he crosses the Ila River and launches a surprise attack near the town of Mulhouse, a strategic spot close to the Rhine River. Bournonville did not expect the French to show up in the middle of winter. The scattered Imperials scrambled, but could not effectively coordinate a defense. Turenne's winter maneuver was risky, but it paid off. Led by Montauban, the French cavalry strikes hard and fast, hitting the Imperial left held by Hermann of Baden-Baden. The Imperials had managed to take a defensive position, with their left resting on the forest and their right anchored near the town. But the French frontal assault is a feint. The real pressure is yet to come. Turenne had secretly reinforced his right wing with a large concentration of troops, including elite cavalry and fresh infantry. These reinforcements were concealed during the initial approach and brought up quickly to swing around the Imperial left. The French right, now heavily bolstered, threatened to outflank the Imperial left. The shock of this sudden mass of fresh French troops caused the collapse of Hermann's left wing.
Just like
Once
that.
the left gave way, the rest of the Imperial line became exposed and started to fall back in disorder. Turenne attempted to organize a retreat, but the French cavalry, especially those from the reinforced right wing, pressed hard and turned the withdrawal into a rout. Although not a major pitched battle, Mulhouse was an important, sharp action that gave the French control over Alsace. Turenne's surprise winter campaign had arguably flipped the momentum in France's favor and showed
But
just
nicely
how
to exploit
brilliant and
this.
daring the French commander could be. Turenne orders his 30,000 men to proceed to Colmar. By now, Bournonville and the Great Elector, who had arrived in the wake of Arnsheim, had realized the staggering audacity of their opponent's maneuver, and they rushed to take their unconditioned men from their billets and back into the field.
I mean, they're in the town
On the
of this.
5th of January, on a field near the road between Colmar and Turkheim, a manic and wild-eyed army
So I guess they don't want to be besieged, yeah. Yeah, they don't actually want to be besieged.
of Frenchmen comes face to face once more with the bemused and agitated army of the Holy Roman Empire, along with their Brandenburger allies.
Burger.
French scouts reconnoiter the Imperial positions in the dark and see that it stretches almost the entire length between the two towns, with the Imperial right at Turkheim and the left at Colmar. This left flank is protected by the Loch, Thur and Iller rivers, while the right is bordered by the Fech, of which a tributary seems to run entirely in front of the
Yeah, they have to cross the freaking river to get to the other side. I mean, it's maybe not a river, maybe it's more like a stream.
army's forward position.
That's
When
not
the
great.
weak and late winter sun starts to rise, Turenne can see for himself that the natural boundaries have been augmented by artillery batteries,
Yeah, that's not
as
good.
well as ramparts and balustrades. Bournonville and Frederick William have done well. Turenne's army is roughly the same strength as that which he commanded at Arnsheim, being in the order of 30,000 men.
What happened to all these reinforcements?
Bournonville's army is still larger, however, anywhere from a couple of thousand greater than Turenne's roster to 50,000 in total.
Well,
Again, taking a defensive posture, they await Turenne's opening moves, which come around 11 o'clock. Marching forward from the center with an emphasis on their right wing, the French make for the Colmar positions. This advance is led by the Comte de Loge, who spreads his men out as far as possible, looking for crossing points over the river to the Imperial positions beyond. The French have some large guns, but most of their heavy ordnance could not be brought through the mountains on the march. Nevertheless, the offensive is sustained to such a degree that Bournonville and Frederick William begin moving troops from the center and the environs of Turkheim to reinforce their left. Once again, this is the action for which Turenne has been waiting.
okay.
He has secreted himself on his own far left wing, behind a hill in a gorge which led between two spurs of the Vosges Mountains. From there, Turenne leads his concealed force on a wide march around the gorge, emerging at the Fech River on the outskirts of Turkheim. In the meantime, the battle at the center and around Colmar continues with constant exchanges, but the two infantry centers of the armies grapple from a distance, the blizzards of musket balls never extending to a close order clash with bayonets.
I mean, whoever goes into the little stream definitely is at a disadvantage, yeah? So you don't want to.
The Imperials, realizing their mistake in ignoring their right, rush units into Turkheim. 6 guns, 12 battalions and several squadrons of cavalry. But Turenne, despite holding the advantage, decides to pause the assault. The battle settles for a time into a deadlock, with the Turkheim forces awaiting imminent deadly attack, and the main armies in Colmar still battling on in vicious but limited forays. Finally, when it appears that the Imperials will not simply withdraw from the field and spare the necessity of a costly fight,
That's what he was waiting
Turenne
for.
gives the order to advance at 3 o'clock. His cavalry units, having waited with exceeding discipline under the Imperial guns from Turkheim for what seemed like hours, now surge forward like furies unleashed from Tartarus, crossing the freezing river as though it were not there, and firing pistol and swinging saber at the now confounded and rattled enemy. Everything happens in a rush. The Imperial defenders flee Turkheim, and Turenne is able to bring infantry into the village while his cavalry move forward to secure the outer section. But the Imperials launch a counterattack, brimming out of their still intact center and with the regrouped elements of their right wing. For a moment, all hangs in the balance. The Imperials have the opportunity to catch Turenne's attack force and turn them,
just needs to
upending the
charge this
result of the
cavalry.
day and handing the French general a defeat that will open the doors of France to them. They might even come close to capturing or killing Turenne himself, for he is now in the town and caught up in the fighting.
But aren't they sounding like way too many reinforcements and weakening their center?
His cavalry commander Foucault has already been killed. The Imperials get within the town once more, and they can feel the hand of Providence at their back, pushing them forward. But they run into a wall of French muskets, fired with a frequency born of interminable drill and deadly accuracy from the same. The bravest men of the front fall, and then the attack pauses, giving the remaining French cavalry their moment to charge forward. The Imperial assault is repulsed, and retreat is the only option. The setting of the sun almost immediately after puts paid to any thoughts of forming another attack.
That's it, okay.
Turenne holds the village, and when the sun rises next morning, he sees that Bournonville and the Great Elector have gone,
Just like that.
robbing him of the chance of annihilating their army in its entirety, but leaving thousands of the dead in their wake.
Nice.
Turenne moved.
I mean, it was a pretty simple strategy, but, you know, it worked. Not a decisive battle, once again more of a stop of the advance, but, you know.
Moves on and occupies Colmar, where he finds that the Imperials have left behind 3,000 of the injured in their rush over the Rhine and back to
That's a lot of
Strasbourg.
prisoners.
The Rhineland is French once more, and Turenne, with his veritably insane gamble in crossing mountains during the midst of winter, has saved his nation from certain invasion and ruination. Louis awards him titles and cash rewards, and the Sun King's rule continues in the ascendant over the greatest power in Europe.
Okay.
If you like what you see, consider support.
Well, that was interesting. That was definitely interesting. Yeah. Again, I would say it was like kind of simple, the strategies, but, you know, if it works, it's great, right? That's what it is. That's what it is. Good video. Good little history video. I enjoyed it. I really don't have much context of this whole historical period of like the Roman Empire attacking France or something. Definitely a period of history that I have not touched on outside of this video, I guess. Something I have to learn eventually. A single video like this is always nice, but eventually I need some kind of like chronological order kind of thing about it. Because, we always watch so many like random videos about specific battle of a specific time, but I don't know anything about like the rest of this time period. So, I'm kind of lost, right? Good stuff. When is the 30-year war? I forget.